you watching closely?
Go on Google Images and look for pictures of black holes from before 2014. I remember learning about black holes in elementary school or middle school and envisioning them just like this, a dark circle in space. Now look at images dated after 2014. This is the cultural pull of Christopher Nolan. Obviously, over the last decade, it's also the case that our understanding of black holes has increased and we've been able to visualize them more concretely, but I'm gonna bet I'm not the only one whose mental default is Interstellar's breathtaking illustration. 2014's box office was dominated by huge blockbusters, 4 superhero movies, 5 franchise sequels or adaptations, and 1 original blockbuster. Since it originally came out in 2014, Interstellar has been re-released several times, taking in millions every time it shows up in theaters, over $77 million in total just from its re-releases. If you re-release Transformers: Age of Extinction, I don't think you'd find throngs of people clamoring to relive the iconic moment where a giant robot uses a large magnet to cause destruction, and then apparently loses a fight with Mark Wahlberg. Like, just the guy? No, people love Nolan's movies in a different way, and it's not hard to see why. The crew of the Endurance stops at their first candidate for a new homeworld, Miller's Planet, perched at the rim of the black hole that sits at the center of the system. The black hole's gravity means that every hour they spend on the planet will equate to years of Earth time. As their ship enters the atmosphere, a sound almost like a metronome, like the ticking of a clock, creeps into the background of the music. They touch down expecting to find Miller there, but they find only wreckage, floating in knee-deep water, and they realize they didn't understand the rules. The time distortion means that Miller's signal, seen on Earth for a decade, has only been broadcasting for minutes. Miller has just died, and the mountains looming in the distance, well...
Those aren't mountains. They're waves.
I was 14 years old when I saw this in theaters, and I can still remember the inhale, the overwhelming rush of seeing something so visually spectacular. This image, this music, left a permanent mark on my psyche. When the crew returns to the Endurance, they find their mistake has cost them 23 years. Messages have streamed in from Earth, from their loved ones. Coop sits down in front of the screen and watches as his son, still in high school when Coop left, graduates from school, meets his wife, has his first child, loses that child. His son's entire life slipped by in the few hours Coop spent down on Miller's Planet. And he begins to cry as his son admits that he's stopped believing Coop is ever coming home. He reaches out to the screen as if he can touch his son, can comfort him, and suddenly his daughter appears. Murph never forgave him for leaving, and this is the first time she sent him a message. At first, he's slack-jawed, almost disbelieving at the woman she's grown into. The camera cuts quickly back to Murph, and back an instant later to Coop, and in that instant, he's already sobbing. This performance by Matthew McConaughey of just emoting in front of a screen, it's raw, it's beautiful, and it's only enhanced by the wistful, longing love theme playing underneath it, a masterpiece score by Hans Zimmer that he wrote without even seeing a frame of film, based on conversations with Nolan where they envisioned a sound that could convey a father's unbounded, timeless love for his daughter. Defending the end of Interstellar is a great way to start an argument at dinner in my family. Both my dad and my brother have always been fascinated with space, and they're both big sci-fi people in general, and both of them hate this ending. This is an opinion that is not uncommon online, but you know what? I actually like the ending. The bookshelf inside the black hole is definitely weird, but if I told you it was a 3D subspace of 5D space, now it makes sense, right? Come on, what are you, stupid? The movie reveals in a very rapid dialogue exchange between Tars and Coop that in the future, humans evolved to navigate in 5 dimensions instead of 3. How would 5-dimensional beings communicate with 3-dimensional beings? To 5-dimensional beings, time might be traversable like physical distance for us, but it would be infinitely vast. Navigating to a precise point in infinite time and vast physical space would be almost impossible, unless they bring someone who can navigate to the correct time and place to convey the information. Coop's love for Murph, his connection to her, is suggested to be like the gravity he can manipulate from inside the bookshelf. It can cross dimensions and exert itself across time. Is it as realistically grounded as a lot of the other parts of this movie? I mean, it's more realistic than this part where they fly an unmanned drone with a laptop trackpad, but what's inside a black hole is sort of the ultimate unknown, both in the story of this movie and in our actual universe. Michael Caine says from the beginning that the only way to get all the humans off of Earth is to get data from inside a black hole. We might be able to extract a lot of useful information about gravity from inside a black hole, but no information can escape it. So I'm kind of okay with Nolan playing a little fast and loose to suggest a cool solution to that mystery. This movie spends so much time exploring in a very detailed way the real mysteries and paradoxes that our scientific universe contains. And it feels right that at the end it leverages the one mystery that we might never be able to solve. And when you also factor in how emotionally satisfying this whole sequence is as a climax to the movie, not just inside the bookshelf, but like when Coop detaches his craft to leave Brand with enough resources to get to Edmund's planet, a perfect crashing together of dialogue and transcendently beautiful music.
Ranger 2, prepare to detach.
What? No! No! Cooper!
3.
Cooper, what are you doing?
Newton's third law. You gotta leave something behind.
You told me we had enough resources for both of us.
We agreed, Amelia. 90%. Detach.
Christopher Nolan has a singular ability to take paradoxical, labyrinthine subjects like relativistic time dilation and draw out their emotional core, blending these almost mathematical emotional buildups with the kind of adrenaline rush we watch action movies for. Interstellar somehow stands out to me as this soulful, contemplative love story, but also the pulse-pounding adventure thriller. Like when I saw this docking scene for the first time, my pulse was pounding, I tell you what. But Interstellar struck out pretty hard come awards season. Like they threw at VFX because of course, but not even nominated for original screenplay, not even nominated for Best Picture, loses Best Score to the Grand Budapest Hotel. I love the Grand Budapest Hotel, but no, dude, incorrect. But if there's one type of movie the Academy loves giving awards to, it's the historical drama. There's some kind of magnetic pull between Oscar voters and underdog stories of the unlikely happenings of history. You know exactly what kind of movie I'm talking about. Nobody thought they could do it, but by golly, they did. And what a world we live in because of it. So it wasn't exactly a surprise that the first Christopher Nolan Oscar sweep was his take on the biopic. But the thing about Oppenheimer that sets it apart from most of its biopic counterparts is how it plays with the rules of the genre. Right off the bat, there's no underdog. As soon as the first nucleus is split, every physicist around the world knows that an atomic bomb can be created. It's just a question of who's going to get there first. The issue with most historical dramas is that they come out feeling so indistinguishable from 100 other movies in the same genre. Oppenheimer creates a unique feeling by selectively sampling from different genres. The first act plays like a standard biopic, the second has the energy of a heist movie, and the third is more like a courtroom drama. Its uniqueness is also set off by Ludwig Göransson's masterpiece score. Genuinely, this is like my favorite movie score of all time. I feel like half the time in a historical drama, the music just blends right into the wallpaper, but this score screams at you to pay attention to it. A melancholy, post-apocalyptic, paradoxical brilliance that somehow simultaneously conveys urgency and existential dread. When we're early in Oppenheimer's life, the violins bring out so much somber, contemplative energy perfect for an angsty physics revolutionary. At Los Alamos, the synths start to set a driving pace for the sprint to beat the Nazis. And in the aftermath, all these instruments come crashing together to make government court proceedings exciting. What, is that a harp in there? Harps are what angels play while lounging around on clouds and shit. How did he get it to sound like this harp is about to kill me with a knife? Every musical motif in this movie is perfectly tuned to the character's emotional state. Kitty's theme has a wistfulness that lines up exactly with an educated woman burning with passion but forced to play the part of the dutiful mother and wife. Groves' theme somehow communicates a man committed to duty, even in moments where it hurts him to do it. But all of them pale in comparison to Can You Hear the Music, a song that Ludwig Göransson thought would be physically impossible to play. I don't have nearly enough knowledge of music theory to understand it completely, but the composition process of this piece of music that has now seared itself into my memory is fascinating. The song plays over a montage of Oppenheimer studying physics, so Ludwig Göransson wanted it to sound scientific, mathematical. So he started with something algorithmic, a pattern of ascending and descending notes. But to convey a feeling of learning, he had to play with tempo.
I always thought about this, how when you are learning to master something, and you start it in one tempo, each time you play it, the better you get, you turn the tempo up. By the end of it, after you've been practicing for a long time, you've achieved a level where you can play it flawlessly in any tempo. The feeling of mastering something on your instrument is so rewarding.
By incorporating these constant tempo changes, he was able to somehow capture the feeling of mastering a skill inside a piece of music. Okay, but now you have to somehow get live musicians to play this piece while shifting tempos in unison.
I don't think it was going to be humanly possible to do that with 26 string players together. I was like, that's not going to work. But then in their headphones, because they're getting a click, and what if we make a click track so that changes tempo before it happens on the page? Now the tempo track looks like this. And I'll play you the click track together with the violin. So they had 4 clicks and then they start playing. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Here's the new tempo. Click goes out here. New tempo here. Tempo comes up, they get a new tempo.
Dude, these musicians are incomparably talented. If you plunk this music down in front of my 14-year-old viola playing ass, I think I would have pissed my pants. Most biopics would be content just to explore the contents of a person's life. The best biopics find a theme of the person's life and explores how it filters into every moment in their journey. A young Oppenheimer stares into a pool of standing water as raindrops make ripples across its surface. He's mesmerized by it, and as we'll see in the next few minutes, he has a unique ability to see the physical mechanisms behind the visible world. But the ripples also suggest consequences, radiating out from each tiny impact. We see flashes of them at several points in this movie. During this description of an exploding ship, until that point the largest man-made explosion in history, while Jean drowns herself, or perhaps is drowned, in the bathtub. And in the final conversation with Einstein, as it becomes clear there is no stopping the ripples of Oppenheimer's legacy. That's the opening shot, and it plays into almost every aspect of Oppenheimer's story, a story of guilt. A college-age Oppenheimer callously poisons an apple for his lab professor and guiltily sprints in the next day to throw it out at the last second. But the atom bomb isn't a poisoned apple. It can't be discarded or covered up or put back in the bottle. Oppenheimer starts the atomic race on sure footing, determined to stop the Nazis from annihilating the United States. But even as he runs, the ground is shifting beneath him. By the time they finish, it's not Germany they'll use it on, it's Japan. And we realize that from the very first moments of this movie, we've been hearing the sound of guilt. The sound of a joyful crowd celebrating him for something that he wants more than anything to be able to undo. But his legacy has been bound up with the atom bomb. He's on the cover of Time. He's the father of the bomb. So he guiltily uses his platform to try to shape the nuclear policy of the Cold War, to try to reduce the fallout of his actions. But the world never wanted him for nuance. He lives in a world of dogma. And when he clashes with popular dogma, his country erases him. And, guilty till the end, he lets himself be erased. Because he thinks he deserves it. The visions and dreams that plagued him in his younger days, of whirling subatomic particles and paradoxical quantum realities, are replaced by visions of a larger scale, of a world falling endlessly towards its own destruction. The inevitable ripples radiating out from the story of his life. Oppenheimer is Christopher Nolan at his most unconstrained. It marked the point in his career where he said, "I want to recreate a nuclear explosion on camera," and then a studio gave him the money to do that. But for a more distilled display of Nolan's style, it's equally interesting to see what he's capable of building from scraps. If all of Christopher Nolan's movies were a Christopher Nolan movie, following would be The Bank Robbery, The Opera Siege, the little microcosm of ideas that tells you what rules you're playing by. And the first rule is, time doesn't move linearly. Nonlinear storytelling has become a hallmark of Nolan's movies, but Following is probably the clearest example of how he uses it to disguise the plot's twists and turns, jumping back and forth between timelines so that when a reveal hits, it hits with maximum effect. Made on a budget of $6,000, Following provides the most stripped-down version of Christopher Nolan, providing a window into who he was as a writer-director before he had any experience with blockbuster filmmaking. Rather than feel constrained by his limited budget, Nolan leaned into the restriction, challenging himself to write the kind of story that would benefit from the minimalistic production typical of low-budget indie movies. Recruiting a team of collaborators from his time at university, Nolan instructed his cast not to change their appearance for a year, shooting the film on weekends using whatever locations they could scrounge together. What results is a tightly wound puzzle, an image of Nolan's work in miniature. A bored writer begins following strangers, picking one out of a crowd and tailing them to see where they go and what they do. At first, he gives himself rules to constrain the obsession that he can feel forming. Don't follow people at night. Don't make women feel unsafe. But most importantly, never follow the same person twice. This most important rule is the first one broken, leading the writer to an encounter with Cobb, a burglar who offers to teach him his methods. The first time they break into an apartment, Cobb looks for what he calls the box.
What box?
Everyone has a box. With men, it's usually a shoebox.
Is there valuables in it?
No, more interesting, more personal. Things like snapshots, letters, little trinkets for Christmas. Cracker. See? Envelope. Photos with a form, cards, notes. It's sort of unconscious collection. A display.
What do you mean, display?
For a display, each thing tells something very intimate about the people.
There are echoes of Inception here, in seeking out the place where people by default store the stuff that reveals the most about their inner selves. Cobb himself seems to foreshadow the Joker, committing crimes not for personal gain, but almost to send a message.
You take it away. You show them what they had.
Following has several of these little artifacts, hints at the sort of ideas that fascinate its creator. But by the time the movie ends, it becomes clear that what fascinates the creator the most is deception, misdirection. The nonlinear structure of the story disguises a twist, which gets the viewer to lower their guard, keeping them off balance for an even bigger twist. By the time the dust settles, the writer has handed himself over to the authorities, inadvertently providing them with all the evidence they need to lock him away. And Cobb vanishes back into the crowd. The idea of her following came after Nolan's apartment was burglarized. Upon realizing that a bag was among the missing items, the investigators told Nolan this is actually pretty common, that burglars often use a bag they find in the home to carry the rest of the stolen goods. That conversation would find its way directly into the movie. Nolan takes his inspiration from a lot of different places. Sometimes the inspiration comes from a concrete experience. Other times, a much more abstract concept serves as the seed of the idea. In an auditory illusion called a shepherd tone, 3 ascending notes, each separated by an octave, are played simultaneously at differing intensities. The highest note fades out from loud to soft, while the lowest fades in from soft to loud. This gives the aural impression of a barbershop pole of sound, the illusion of one constantly rising, intensifying note. Nolan makes use of shepherd tones in the soundtrack to The Prestige, as well as in the whine of the Bat Pod, but it wasn't until Dunkirk that he focused an entire movie around it. Not only does the score for Dunkirk prominently feature shepherd tones to create a feeling of consistently rising anxiety, but the plot structure itself, of 3 intensifying storylines told on different timescales, reflects that same illusion. Dunkirk is a blueprint for how Christopher Nolan subverts genre expectations. War films are overwhelming and bloody, and they tell stories of great leaders overcoming forces of evil. Dunkirk examines a terrified, retreating Allied force. We barely ever see the enemy. Instead, we hear them. Every gunshot comes out of nowhere, hits your ears like a shockwave. The soldiers clustered along the mole have come to dread the whine of German dive bombers, shepherd tones in miniature. Dunkirk works because it changes the rules. Instead of the typical World War II story about Americans swooping in to save the day, it focuses on ordinary soldiers struggling to retreat. It picks apart the moral gray faced by teenage boys just trying to get home. From the beginning, Tommy's just trying to make it back to England. If working with the mysterious silent stranger will get him there, then so be it. If it means picking up a wounded soldier and trying to sneak onto a medical boat, so be it. And at the end, when he and his fellow Englishmen are trapped on a sinking ship, needing to jettison a person to keep the boat from going down, and the mob points its finger at the Frenchman he's been running with, so be it.
Somebody's got to get off, so the rest of us can live. Do you want to volunteer?
No. I'm going home.
And if this is a price...
I'll live with it. It's wrong.
Instead of trying to unsettle us with graphic imagery or over-the-top violence, Dunkirk unsettles by forcing the viewer to bask in fear and uncertainty for 90 minutes. War movies are often inherently patriotic, and the patriotism of Dunkirk comes in the moments where the desperation and helplessness everyone is feeling is mitigated by the courage of ordinary individuals. The excitement of the crowd as these two manage to carry a wounded soldier across a gap on this flimsy piece of plywood. A newspaper's report of a young boy who died trying to rescue his countrymen. The emotional musical swell as a civilian fleet crosses the war-torn English Channel to bring their boys home. And the cheer of an army as a pilot with no fuel left in his plane glides in at the last second and shoots down a dive bomber, saving countless lives at the cost of his own. Survival requires sacrifice, but surrender is not an option. Insomnia is probably the least widely known Christopher Nolan movie. Compared to the rest of his filmography, it's incredibly straightforward, but I think people are really sleeping on this one. This is the only movie he's directed that he didn't write, and you can feel it. The plot is perfectly linear. It doesn't get into as many existential themes. There are no twisting corridors of memory or time, but it's a movie that's fascinated me both times I've watched it because it's the one piece of his filmography that lets us separate his visual style from his writing. Insomnia is set in the town of Nightmute, Alaska, so far north the sun never sets. As Detective Will Dormer spends more days in Nightmute, his sleep-deprived brain begins to race, and guilty flashes of memory intrude where they don't belong. It's a technique we see again in Oppenheimer and Inception that gives present-day action a more stream-of-consciousness feeling. It's also perfectly deployed in the context of a movie about sleeplessness. The rapidness of the editing creates the exact feeling of a mind desperate for rest, unable to properly focus on any one thought or idea without it shifting and sliding into others. Insomnia also gives us a blueprint for how Nolan uses one of his most powerful tools, his incredible roster of actors. Nolan's casts are always a tactical blend of typecast actors and actors playing directly opposite to type. The Dark Knight puts Christian Bale in his standard action lead, puts Morgan Freeman in the cool intellectual assistant, puts Michael Caine in the most entertaining British old man. Very by-the-book casting choices, all of which orbit around the completely transformed Heath Ledger. Interstellar casts Matt Damon as a villain precisely to take advantage of typecast. Matt Damon is always the hero. Surely he wouldn't push Matthew McConaughey off a cliff, and here we see that technique used to full effect. Hilary Swank perfectly at home in playing the enthusiastic rookie. Al Pacino, almost the stereotype of a grizzled noir detective, fiercely intelligent and tough but also morally compromised. Absolute honk shoo-in for the Academy Award for Sleepiest Guy, as soon as they get around to adding that category, but all of them revolving around Robin Williams, who is so far out of type it's almost hard to imagine the same dude playing this robot who was definitely addicted to cocaine. I mean, they both for sure have strangled people to death, but where Fender Pinwheeler was likely an enthusiastic murderer, Walter Finch has more shades of gray. As Al Pacino loses more and more control over his own mind, Robin Williams' control over the situation tightens. He's calm, calculating. Nolan has a knack for taking certain actors outside their usual range and giving them the opportunity to completely redefine themselves. It's unfortunate that this movie is so overshadowed by the rest of Nolan's work because it's genuinely a great movie. Tightly scripted, beautifully acted, with very evocative camera work and editing, but the reason it doesn't quite stick in my mind the way Nolan's other movies do is because it's missing what has probably become his most distinguishing trademark: the final twist of the knife. Memory underlies all of identity. Every piece of personality that you have is the result of your behavior being shaped by past experience. In a situation where you were incapable of change because you could never accumulate those experiences, how would you derive purpose? Why would you care what you did if you could never know for certain how your actions shaped your current situation? Would you lie to yourself to be happy? Interrograde amnesia. Leonard Shelby loses his memory every few minutes, starts over from scratch over and over and over again. And he's trying to track down his wife's killer, leaving himself scribbled notes for future reference, talking to people and trying to determine if he's met them before, if they're telling him the truth, or lying confidently because they know he'll forget. All of his knowledge comes from various narrators. Which ones can he trust? Again, Nolan plays with casting his actors according to type. From the beginning of the movie, Leonard's picture of Joe Pantoliano reads, "Don't believe his lies." And it's like, oh, believe me, I was not going to. I saw this man beat a woman to death in the parking lot and justify it like this.
She was a hooah.
Joe Pantoliano only plays the type of characters where you look at him and go, ugh. And that's why this ending sequence, where it's Teddy maybe telling the truth, probably, unless he isn't, works so damn well. I don't want to believe Discount Pitbull from The Matrix. I want to believe the villain from Iron Man 3. By incepting you with the idea that Joe Pantoliano is a rat, Nolan provides a smokescreen for his final reveal. Like all of his twists, he's giving it away up front. You just don't see it until it's too late. Everyone is using Leonard. The man running the hotel is renting him multiple rooms because Leonard doesn't remember which one is his. Natalie takes advantage of his condition to turn him against Dodd. Teddy is using him to squeeze money out of the drug dealers he sends his way. So when we learn that Leonard is using himself, of course he is. Wouldn't it be nice to have a righteous crusade to storm around on? Without memory, he's not capable of having new experiences, of letting his grief go. He has to live in that moment forever. So why wouldn't he take advantage of his situation? This final unraveling, the moment that flips the whole story around on its head and makes you look at the whole thing differently, is why Christopher Nolan's movies stay seared in the cultural memory. And he pulls off these incredibly cool rug pulls by a total dedication to structure. Memento is so intricately structured that explaining it to someone looks like this.
So, okay, what do you have? You have the beginning of the film here as a hairpin, like that. That's basically the end of the movie. This stuff is the black and white stuff. This is color, running backwards as a series of jumps. And what we do is we cut between the two the whole way through. Scene here, scene there, scene there, scene there, scene there, scene there, and they meet towards the end of the film. But then within this, you have flashbacks to a different time.
By committing to this level of intricacy, Nolan creates the experience of amnesia in the viewer, an experience of not knowing what events led to the present. But if you think this Memento diagram is hilariously complicated, this is like medium difficulty Christopher Nolan. You ready for advanced? How about nightmare? There's a point in the final action sequence of Tenet where a building simultaneously explodes and puts itself back together where you go, oh, I see why this is cool. But there is never a point where you go, yeah, I understand this. All of Nolan's movies play with time, but this movie takes time and turns it into Play-Doh spaghetti. Nolan talks about the experience of watching a film editor running film backwards and forwards during the editing process and realizing that cameras have an ability to see time in a way that humans can't. This observation was the seed of the idea that would become Tenet, a spy thriller about a war between the present and the future where time can run both forwards and backwards. Structurally, it is without a doubt Nolan's most complex and intricate plotline, but unlike his other mindbenders, Tenet doesn't enjoy the same universal acclaim. For most fans, it seems like this is the one where Nolan's labyrinthine construction boils over into confusion. This movie does have its enthusiasts, and there are, of course, 1,000 fan theories about the intricacies of this story. Neil is the adult Max. That one I actually think might be true, because how else does he know what date Kat and Sator's vacation was on? But then people are like, oh, Ives is actually Sir Michael Crosby. Because they're both British, I guess? This movie references Feynman's hypothesis that all electrons are the same electron at different points in time, but what Feynman didn't know was that all British people are actually the same British person. Of course, the reason why this is the most divisive Christopher Nolan movie is that it is absolutely fucking incomprehensible. On an audio-visual level, there is so much shit happening between the dialogue and your ears. Rushing waves, explosions, gunfire, jet engines, Ludwig Göransson absolutely popping the fuck off. And then once you solve the Da Vinci Code of actually comprehending what words are being said, it's just a 7-layer dip of motives on top of exposition on top of insanely minute details. Look at this scene with Michael Caine in it. I mean, of course, the scene is a flawless cinematic achievement because there he is. But like, listen to the flow of this conversation.
I assume you're familiar with the Soviet-era secret cities.
Closed cities, not shown on maps, built around sensitive industries. Most of them have been opened up and renamed as regular towns.
Okay, I think I'm following you.
Not the one Sato grew up in. Stalsky 12. In the 70s, you had a population of about 200,000.
Okay, the population was 200,000. I'm gonna write this down.
Sato emerged from this blank spot on the map with ambition and enough money to buy his way into the British establishment.
Through his wife?
Catherine Barton, eldest niece of Sir Frederick Barton.
Why do I need to know who her uncle is?
Well, how do I get to Sato?
Oh, through her, of course.
Well, you may have an inflated idea of my powers of seduction.
We have an ace in the hole.
You're carrying a Goya in a Harrods bag.
It's a fake by a Spaniard named Arepo. One of the two we confiscated from an embezzler in Bern.
An embezzler in Bern? What? The main plot points we get from this conversation are an introduction to Stalsk 12, which is where the big final battle happens, the idea that the protagonist is going to have to use Kat to get access to Sator, and that Kat defrauded Sator with this guy Arepo who she had an affair with. All the other stuff just makes it harder to retain that information. Nolan has said that he went out of his way to avoid watching spy movies while making Tenet, relying only on his memory to create the feeling of a spy movie, which is a pretty intriguing way to write one. It definitely let him create something not constrained by the tropes of the spy genre, but that sleek, mysterious coat of paint that makes this movie feel like a spy movie gets kinda scuffed up when the scenes where you tell the audience what's happening and why it matters sound like this.
In 2008, a remote Russian missile station was overwhelmed and held for a week. When the station was retaken, 241 on war warhead was 3/4 of a kilo lighter.
And on top of that, everyone's motives in this movie just have layers on top of layers where they say they want one thing, but actually it's all a ruse disguising their real motive, which is then revealed to have been a fake motive intended to trick the protagonist into thinking that he was trying to steal plutonium, but Priya actually wanted him to lose the plutonium so they could. I have seen this movie like 6 times and I still don't really understand the second act, like who knows what and what they're doing and why. I think he just needed to reveal the algorithm a lot earlier, because that's a really cool plot point. An algorithm that can invert the direction of entropy. It takes the idea of a world-destroying threat like a nuclear weapon and ties it into the whole story about inversion. But more than that, it concretely frames the final battle so that you, well, not understand it, but you at least know what they're trying to do. Pretending that it's plutonium for half the movie is just confusing. Nolan's other super high concept movies usually lay out the stakes in the first act so that the second and third acts can focus on revealing emotionally significant stuff. Tenet gives you the stakes and then constantly changes them, which makes it a lot harder to follow. Okay, but none of that detracts from how badass this movie is. I mean, right from the outset, he basically tells you how to enjoy this movie.
Don't try to understand it. Feel it.
Feel the impact of this dude explosively beating the shit out of 8 guys. Feel the panic in the moment after this lockpick breaks and they're about to be stuck in a vault filling up with unbreathable gas. And most of all, feel this bizarre futuristic soundtrack. I mean, put your grubby little mitts all over each and every one of these synths. When I heard Ludwig Göransson was doing the soundtrack, I was like, where's Hans? Give me my boy. But I don't think Hans could make something like this. Foils, Rainy Night and Talon, the protagonist, but most of all, posterity. A 14-minute wall of sound where every musical motif in this movie crashes together into the feeling of pouring jet fuel into your ears. I didn't understand the core of Tenet until I started writing stories of my own. When you're plotting through a narrative, stumbling forward, trying to find your way through, you feel like an idiot. Nothing you're writing is as good as the idea in your head. And then you get to the end, and when you go to make a second pass, you've been briefed about the engagement you're entering. You know how it ends. Attacking it like a temporal pincer makes it a little bit easier to create a more intricate thing because every part of it leans on every other part. In case you thought a temporal pincer is what Jimmy Neutron's bullies gave him in middle school, this entire movie is fascinated with the idea of a military strategy where an army splits into 2 teams. The first team goes through the battle in forward time and briefs the second team at the end, who travels through the battle in reverse time to brief the first team at the beginning. Both sides fight the battle knowing what is going to happen. There is no beginning to the knowledge of what happens in the battle. It informs itself. The way that all the main characters' stories play into the idea of the temporal pincer is kind of insane. Kat enviously talks about seeing a woman dive off of Sator's boat, jealous of how free she is. And just like based on the themes of this movie, it's pretty obvious that's gonna be her, but at the end of the movie, the way she waits for a second on the edge of the boat for her past self to turn her head, just so she can give herself an image to inspire her to claim her freedom, that's fucking sick. And then you have the interplay between Neil and the protagonist. This first scene in the yacht club is a totally different watch the second time around. You can see Neil visibly fascinated by this person who he knows so well.
Would you take a child hostage? A woman?
If I had to.
These questions come out of nowhere on the first watch, but the second time you realize he's like benchmarking his mentor. He's feeling out who he is at this point in his life. Oh, and the ending, Neil accepting the necessity of his death and calmly walking towards it. I think this should have been the emotional core of the movie, the relationship between these two, each one having mentored the other. In a movie fixated on paradoxes, the paradoxical structure of their relationship carried the most emotional gravity. Nolan isn't hiding the ball about how structure plays so heavily into the emotional payoff of his films. He's acknowledged that in certain ways, most of his stories are about the craft of making movies, and his most complicated screenplays are insights into the process of their own creation. The most mind-bending labyrinths he constructs are, in a lot of ways, his most definitive statements on the art of crafting the perfect magic trick. What would it be like to share your identity with another person? Could you survive the toll it would take on you? And maybe more importantly, could the people around you?
We were 2 young men at the start of a great career. 2 young men devoted to an illusion.
That opening line is so quintessentially Nolan. It's a little bit of exposition, but one that sets the tone for what's about to happen. Nolan's exposition lets you sit with the themes of the movie before the action even starts. From the very beginning, he's almost poking us in the eyes with the foreshadowing. This scene with the performer who for his whole life has faked a limp to pull off his magic trick, followed immediately by the scene of this boy seeing a bird reappear and asking, but where's his brother? The prestige is showing you its entire hand, but because you don't expect it the first time, you don't see all the flags it's waving in your face.
Once you know, it's actually very obvious.
At multiple points, this movie fixates on creatures that are disposable after their death. The camera lingers on Borden discarding a dead bird. By the end, one Borden, many birds, and countless Angiers are discarded too. Angier sums it up perfectly.
No one cares about the man who disappears, the man who goes into the box. They care about the one who comes out the other side.
Christian Bale's performance in this movie is so understated and yet so brilliant. When you watch this movie the second time, you can see how his acting shifts depending on which of the 2 Bordens he's supposed to be. When we see him with Sarah, showing her the bullet catch, you can almost see how he's trying to pretend to be in love with her. At the funeral for Julia, you can tell it's the Borden who didn't tie the knot. And his acting is paired with very meticulous dialogue, where even the verbal mannerisms of the 2 Bordens are subtly highlighted. It was a clever touch to let us see both Bordens meet their love interests. Their first interactions with Sarah and Olivia are so similar and yet so different. You can see 2 different men and their different personalities, and the only thing they share is Christian Bale's face and voice. The music in this movie also really shines. David Julian's scores are a little unremarkable at times in Memento and Insomnia, but the muddy, hazy ambiance he's able to create this time is perfect for a story told with so many blurring, intersecting timelines. Whereas in Memento he told the story backwards, in The Prestige, Nolan instead jumps around the different storylines without any warning, using scenes from each to enhance the impact of scenes from others. Nolan likes his movies in layers, but unlike Inception where each level of the dream feels distinct from the others, this movie stirs them together until the chronology of the story is completely intermingled. It makes for a really unique viewing experience, one that manages to walk the fine line between satisfying complexity and total confusion. The apex of this film is the final performance by Angier. Set as a trap for Borden, Angier opens by reminding Borden how their feud started. The water tank, which on paper is used for a simple tank escape trick, but in reality is needed for a much more important purpose. Angier invites the crowd up with him on stage, and as they inspect the machine, he stands quietly with his eyes closed, illuminated by the spotlight. He's preparing himself for death. The sort of sad, determined calm on Hugh Jackman's face combined with the ethereal lighting and music. I'm not sure what instruments are being played here, but it's kind of wistful, a little bit eerie and mysterious. It's perfect. These frames have burned themselves into my memory from the first time I saw them. And then he re-emerges, draped in the same spotlight, finally free to bask in the shock and awe of his audience instead of being stuck in the basement. All that's left to reveal is what it cost him. The more I watch The Prestige, the more I think it speaks to Nolan's philosophies on making movies. Angier is the natural showman, the one who knows how to dress up a trick to sell it to an audience. And the movie isn't critical of him for that. Borden himself has to learn some of that showmanship to actually get the world to appreciate his tricks, but it seems to more strongly identify with Borden, relying on sheer dedication to deception. Nolan insists on doing as much in-camera as possible. He uses miniatures and sets and clever camera work to trick our eyes into seeing what he wants us to see. But that commitment to deception is most clearly evident in the meticulous construction of his scripts. The Prestige, like so many of his movies, is a movie that demands to be seen a second time, and once you know what's coming, it's astounding how intricately it's put together. Intricacy is not a quality that's prioritized in blockbusters, because something so complex and emotionally resonant isn't something you can just churn out. But when something takes years of obsession to create, the audience can tell. They can feel it, the level of commitment, the meticulous construction. Nolan has talked about having to make his movies more strategically now because the process takes so much time. Great movies can take years to construct, and the best ones can take a lifetime. Haileybury and Imperial Service College. A teenage Christopher Nolan lies in darkness listening to the sounds of classic film scores. Star Wars, Chariots of Fire. The music plays from an old Walkman, rapidly burning through the AA batteries powering it. Unlike a CD player that stops when it runs out of batteries, the Walkman loses power gradually. As it dies in the liminal space between waking and dreams, the music begins to slow, like time stretching out as the dreamer passes from one layer of reality to the next. University College London. Now he's an undergraduate, and the seed of an idea which was planted years ago begins to grow. A horror movie about dream stealers. The late nights stereotypical of college life necessitate afternoon naps, plunging the mind from wakefulness back into sleep, and these naps frequently resolve themselves into lucid dreams. Nolan describes a lucid dream in which he picks up a book from a table and finds himself able to read it, struck with the thought that his mind is simultaneously reading and writing the book. Lucid dreaming is, in a lot of ways, like making a movie, constructing a world so believable you can live in it for a little while. It's during his time at UCL that Nolan first stumbles across The Circular Ruins, a short story by Jorge Luis Borges, which continues to shape the direction of his idea. A man washes up on an empty beach and drags himself, exhausted, to an abandoned temple. The goal that led him on was not impossible, though it was clearly supernatural. He wanted to dream a man. He wanted to dream him completely, in painstaking detail, and impose him upon reality. This magical objective had come to fill his entire soul. Over years, the man meticulously dreams his creation, spending weeks on each organ, each bone, finally breathing life into the dreamed body and sending him out into the world as his son. The man revels in having created his son, but worries that one day his son will realize he is nothing more than a dream. To be not a man, but the projection of another man's dream, what incomparable humiliation, what vertigo. Eventually, death comes for the old man. A wildfire closes in on him, and he welcomes it, seeing death as the crown upon his old age. He walked into the tatters of flame, but they did not bite his flesh. They caressed him, bathed him without heat and without combustion. With relief, with humiliation, with terror, he realized that he too was but appearance, that another man was dreaming him. 2002. Nolan has just finished making Insomnia with Warner Brothers and decides it's time to pitch his idea. The movie has evolved significantly in the years since he graduated from school. Now it's taken the form of a heist movie. It's going to take a lot of exposition to explain his shared dreaming concept, and heist movies are centered around that kind of exposition, with the explanation of the team's plan and their objective providing a grounding blueprint that will have to be torn up when things inevitably go wrong. Structuring it as a heist movie also allows him to explore the idea of shared dreaming as an analogy for the filmmaking process, the assembling of a team to accomplish a task they can't complete as individuals. But something is missing from his script. It doesn't yet have that emotional core that makes so many of Nolan's movies reverberate in the mind. Ultimately, Warner Brothers passes on his idea, opting to work with him on other projects. 2008. Nolan now has a string of successful films to his name, and he's absorbed with shooting his second Batman movie. The shoot takes 4 months that he has to spend largely apart from his family. When the movie is finished, Nolan and his wife take their children on a month-long vacation. His kids make sand castles on a glittering white beach, and the image sticks in his mind. He takes out the draft of his script, and in a conversation with his wife, realizes what it's missing. As the characters descend deeper and deeper into the dream world, the story has to creep closer and closer to the center of the main character's guilt, his role in the death of his wife, which has kept him separated from his children. The emotional core falls into place. It's time. It's taken decades to grow from the tiny seed of an idea planted in the half-dreaming dark of his adolescence into the mind-bending emotional powerhouse. But those years have shaped it into something intricate and personal, the product of a lifetime of obsession, only achievable with the years of experience with blockbuster filmmaking he collected as the idea grew. In my opinion, it's his masterpiece. Most of Inception's first half is exposition. The teacher-student relationship between Cobb and Ariadne allows Nolan to just explicitly spell out how his concept works, but where most movies would crumble under the weight of that exposition would be almost unwatchably boring to sit through an hour of characters explaining the world. Inception gets a pass just by virtue of how fascinatingly fleshed out that world is. Heist movies are always about accomplishing a goal, and the obstacles along the way to that goal provide the intrigue. Inception's concept creates a ton of these tiny obstacles that have to be entertainingly resolved before the heist even begins. It's not just enough to have to break into Fisher's mind. No, we need a special kind of extractor who can take on the appearance of someone close to Fisher to disguise the planting of the idea. We have to go 3 dream layers deep, so we have to go get a chemist who can make the right kind of sedatives to stabilize the dreams. We have to build the dream level specific to each part of Fisher's psyche we're trying to target. We gotta go talk to Michael Caine, just because we want to. It's immediately clear how much time was spent thinking about the concept and the mechanics of shared dreaming. The brilliance of Inception is in the way that Cobb's story mirrors Fisher's. The deeper they go into Fisher's mind, the more of Cobb starts leaking into the dream. He goes in thinking that if he can stuff down his own personal issues long enough to complete the heist, everything will be okay. He'll be reunited with his children and he'll be able to move on. But his guilt isn't buried that deep. As soon as they get into the dream, a train crashes through the middle of a downtown intersection. We've seen flashes of trains here and there, but we won't know why he's seeing that train until later. In the hotel, images of his children appear suddenly, images of broken glass and billowing curtains. And finally, in the hospital, Maul. What makes Inception such a fascinating movie over and over again is the way that Cobb's emotional journey is so tightly wound around the main objective of the heist team. I can't think of another heist movie where what happens in the end is so closely bound up with the emotional state of the protagonist. It's also a narrative magic trick how he gets us to still root for the crew despite the fact that at the end of the day, they're breaking into a guy's head to psychologically manipulate him into doing what Saito wants. It would have been easy for Saito to have been a villain of this movie, but Nolan psychologically manipulates us into liking Saito. When he confronts Cobb and Arthur, he offers them the chance to kill Nash, who's just betrayed them, and when they decline, he just lets Nash go. Sure, it's implied that Nash will face consequences from the people who hired them, but by sparing his life, we get to see that Saito is constrained by some kind of moral code. There's also this scene where Saito explains why he needs to incept Fisher.
We are the last company standing between them and total energy dominance. We can no longer compete. Soon they'll control the energy supply of half the world. In effect, they become a new superpower. The world needs Robert Fisher to change his mind.
Kinda clever to frame the mission in terms of something overall positive, to make us feel good about the journey we're about to go on. I don't know, it's always kind of fascinated me how he gets us to enthusiastically come along on a mission that's ostensibly pretty bad. This effect is compounded the more we learn about Fisher and his relationship with his father. Cillian Murphy gives a very understated performance that is absolutely essential to the emotional core of the movie. He maintains this air of bitterness, of someone who desperately wanted a relationship with his father but never had one. So the crew is able to take his existing view of his father and redefine it over the course of the heist. As Eames observes Fisher in his father's room, we see that Fisher has tried to place a photo by his father's bed. In the photo, a young Fisher sits with his father, playing with a pinwheel. A snapshot of a moment of happiness in a relationship which we can tell had few of them.
Must be a cherished memory of his.
I put it beside his bed. He hasn't even noticed.
It seems like a trivial detail, but then on the first level of the dream, as Eames leafs through Fisher's belongings, there it is. It's a wish that sits in the back of his mind, for things to have been different between the two of them. It's that wish that the crew will try to exploit as they lead him down a twisting corridor of dreams, spinning a story about an alternate will that represents his father's last wish, a chance to escape from his father's shadow and be his own man. It's kind of fascinating. They are lying to him. Based on what Fisher remembers of their relationship, his dad probably didn't care all that much for him. There is something inherently perverse about warping this dude's view of his father, but they're warping it into a view of his father that will make it easier for him to go on living, and that's why it somehow feels okay. He's been carrying around all this anger, grappling with the fact that his father's last words were an expression of disappointment in him. So when he finally enters the vault and sees the projection of his dying father, there's a lot for them to resolve. The crew takes those corrosive last words and flips them.
I know, Dad. I know you were disappointed. I couldn't be you.
No. I was disappointed that you tried.
You hear that? That's what Inception sounds like. The sound of the idea clicking into place. And he reaches into the safe, spotting the will that he's been told means the freedom to be himself, but it's not the will that sells it for him. Of course, it's the pinwheel. What makes the idea stick isn't the persuasiveness of the narrative the crew laid out for him to discover. It's the piece of himself that he brought along, the shard of bitterness and resentment that he can finally let go of. The ending of Inception has been widely discussed. To exist on the internet in the 2010s was to encounter a barrage of memes and speculation about these last frames, so prevalent that I knew the ending of Inception long before I ever saw it. But honestly, I don't think there's much to debate here. There is definitely an intentional ambiguity in showing the top still spinning, but like all of Nolan's movies, the answer has been in front of us the whole time. Throughout this movie, Cobb is haunted by the faces of his children, or to be more precise, by the absence of their faces. His regret leads him to relive over and over again the memory of the last time he saw them, when he decided to flee the country. He's waiting for them to turn around so he can see their faces one last time, but the moment passes. They're called away and he has to run. And every time his children materialize in his dreams, they're facing away from him. Sometimes they're about to turn, but he turns away. So in the end, when he sees their turned backs like he has 1,000 times, you can see a moment of anxiety. Is this still a dream? But they actually do turn to face him. When he runs to embrace them, that's what matters. We see Cobb absolutely fixated on the top at various points in this movie, but in the end, he doesn't care anymore. I think his obsession with the top is tied in with his guilt over whether Maul was right, about whether there is another layer of reality where she and his real kids are waiting for him. But when he's finally given the chance to hug those kids whose faces have eluded him, he isn't wasting any more time waiting for the top to give him permission. The top might spin and spin, but Cobb isn't looking. It's not a very definitive ending, but it is a satisfying ending. That is, of course, until Inception 2 Dreamfall.
Dreams feel real while we're in them, but the deeper you go, the harder it is to wake up.
This looks great. Leonardo DiCaprio ends up inside a Salvador Dali painting. I think Joseph Gordon-Levitt is exploring the slide at a Chuck E. Cheese, or maybe like the inside of that bean from Chicago. Michael Caine is actively having a stroke. I wish I could forget seeing this.
But the mind doesn't forgive. It remembers.
Dear God, I hope they never make a sequel to this movie. If in 20 years the Warner Discovery Totino's Hyundai Xbox Corporation announces Inception 2, I'm taking them all way out. No, the continuation of Inception that I desperately want is the MMO set in the Inception world that Nolan said was in development in 2010. 15 years of development? Man, this game is probably so good. I can't wait to dust off my Xbox 360 for this one. The Kinect integration of shooting yourself in the head to go to the next level is gonna be sick. Gotta be at least T for teen though. All jokes aside, Christopher Nolan, please make this game. If you don't, I'm going to put a team together to break into your mind and persuade you. I think I was destined to love Inception just based on how fascinated by lucid dreaming I've been at various points in my life. I first read about it after seeing The Matrix for the first time in high school, and I went through a year-long phase of reading obsessively about lucid dreaming and trying all the different techniques to achieve lucidity. Then it kind of ebbed for a while, and it came roaring back in college when I watched Inception for the first time. It's come and gone since then, but it is something I've spent a lot of time thinking about, and I think it has a lot to do with why I love Inception so much. In the aftermath of the massive success of Oppenheimer, there was wide speculation on what Christopher Nolan's next project would be. Insider info kept giving us wildly different rumors. Some said it would be an adaptation of the 1960s TV show The Prisoner. Some said it would be a vampire period drama. Some said it would be an action thriller about two helicopter pilots. Anybody who could Mad Libs 3 movie words together had a guess as to what Nolan was doing next. But all those rumors were put to bed when Universal revealed that Nolan's next movie will be an adaptation of the Odyssey, one of the most iconic stories in Greek myth. And it's crazy because the Odyssey was also something that I was exposed to in high school and then again in college. My favorite English paper I ever had to write was the one I wrote about the Odyssey. I talked about how at the end when Odysseus returns home to Ithaca and talks to Penelope while in disguise, Penelope actually knows it's him. That ending sequence where Odysseus comes home and teams up with his son to purge Ithaca of the suitors who have pillaged his home and harangued his wife is so cinematic and badass. Will this be the best Odyssey interpretation? It's got good competition. Just last year, we actually got an adaptation of this last portion of the poem called The Return, starring Ralph Fiennes as Odysseus, and it was pretty sick. Super unfortunate it came out right before this one, though. But still, Nolan's version has to beat Sea of Monsters, so we'll see. You also have just an insane set of actors signed on to do this movie. Matt Damon is Odysseus. He's played the supporting roles in a couple Nolan movies, and it's time for his Cillian Murphy masterpiece. Tom Holland is Telemachus. I feel like I haven't seen Tom Holland in anything but Spider-Man movies, and they haven't really stretched his acting muscles that far, so I'm excited to see how he handles something with a little more gravity. Anne Hathaway as Penelope. Mwah! Perfect casting. She nailed the manipulative wiliness of Catwoman and the raw intelligence of Brand, and you need both for Penelope. Charlize Theron as Cersei. Perfect. John Bernthal as Menelaus. Exactly. And those are just the ones whose roles we know for sure. Robert Pattinson is back. I'm hoping he's Antinous, sort of the ringleader of the suitors. I want to see him play a straight-up villain. Zendaya is in the mix, rumored to be Athena. Benny Safdie, John Leguizamo, Elliot Page, Corey Hawkins, Mia Goth, Bill Irwin, Himesh Patel. It's just a battering ram of insane talent. All this makes me pretty confident that we are in for a phenomenal time in 2026. But how do I know? What makes me so confident that this mythological action drama will be another Nolan masterpiece? Because he's done it before. The early 1990s was a weird time for Batman. Tim Burton's last outing had been weird, dark, and stylish, but Warner Brothers worried that a direction like that wasn't fun enough. A dark, brooding world didn't leave much room for merchandising, which was becoming more and more important to the process of building franchises. Because that's how studios saw superhero movies at the beginning of the 1990s. Opportunities for toys, roller coasters, promotional tie-ins. There were all these expectations for a superhero movie to perform beyond the box office and create more money-making opportunities outside the theater. So by the early 90s, Batman Returns had failed to live up to the massive box office expectations set by 1989's Batman, and Warner Brothers decided to bring in a new director, Joel Schumacher, the polar opposite 180-degree turn away from Tim Burton. Instead of a gothic Nightmare Before Christmas vibe, Batman now kind of felt like the glow-in-the-dark mini-golf course they have at Zap Zone. Joel Schumacher, pictured here just after being dunked in a jar of liquid, had a particular vision for Batman. It was basically, put famous people in every role and let them do whatever the hell they want. Get campy so we appeal to kids and families. Print cash. And Warner Brothers is like, yeah, we like that last part. What could possibly go wrong? This Warner Brothers. Tommy Lee Jones plays the iconic character Purple Man. I mean Two-Face. Jim Carrey is the Riddler, and Tommy Lee Jones hates him. I cannot sanction your buffoonery. Nicole Kidman, do you want to be in this movie? Do you like Batman? I want to kiss him. Val Kilmer was cast as Batman because he had been to the studio where the 1960s TV series was recorded, and because he had been to a cave with bats in it. And then he spent the whole time on set standing in the corner not saying a damn word because apparently he could not hear anything in the bat suit, so people just stopped talking to him on set. But what about the story? We haven't spent 2 consecutive minutes thinking about what's actually going to happen in this movie. Shouldn't we? Don't worry about it, says Joel Schumacher. The Riddler invents a brain-stealing device that Batman is able to defeat by throwing one batarang at it. Now check out these costumes. I've added some upgrades. Tim Burton is muttering dejectedly in the corner. Oh, I'm too weird. I'm too dark. And then you put nipples on the costume? Go fuck yourself. Needless to say, when Batman Forever comes out, it's incredible. Nobody has ever seen anything like it. It really delivers on the promise that Batman would forever. It receives a 45-minute standing ovation at the Cannes Film Fest. Just kidding. It really fucking sucks. But it makes more money than the last one did, so by Warner Brothers' definition, it's a success. Joel, we need another one immediately. Where's Val? Val? God damn it, can he even hear us right now? Because they could not get Val Kilmer's attention in time to film the new movie, they swapped him out for George Clooney. This time around, everything would get turned up to 1. The number of Arnold Schwarzeneggers in the movie, for example. For his transformative role as Mr. Freeze, they made him wear a blue LED in his mouth, which they eventually had to wrap in a balloon because it kept leaking battery acid inside him. The pressure to generate merchandising opportunities would also somehow increase this time around. Toy companies were included in pre-production meetings. Mr. Freeze's ice gun was specifically designed by toy manufacturers. One toy designer pitched an idea for a Batman figurine which could be balanced on its extremely prominent nipples and spun around like a top. Warner Brothers took him out back and shot him. Batman would go on to develop the idea for the printing press. History is fascinating. Hey Joel, so are we gonna actually write a story for this one? Nah, just give me 200 or 300 ice puns.
What killed the dinosaurs? The Ice Age!
This time around, the box office would not be so kind. Batman and Robin underperformed expectations. And the audience, they hated it. Audiences polled by CinemaScore gave this trash heap a C+, after they'd given the last one an A-. I'm starting to think this rating scale isn't very accurate. But no, people did hate this movie. Warner Brothers, who was so confident in this movie that they had already hired Joel Schumacher to make another one, was like, yeah, we're gonna have to let you go, dude. But what about my masterpiece, Batman Unchained, starring Nicolas Cage as Scarecrow? Wow, that's awesome. But no, you do need to leave. We have called security. In the years that followed, there were a lot of initial efforts to make another Batman movie. Even after Joel Schumacher was shipped out of Warner Brothers in a coffin, there was another attempt to write a sequel to Batman and Robin, keeping George Clooney and Chris O'Donnell around for another movie titled Batman Dar Knight, which kind of makes him sound like a caveman. But Warner Brothers was ready to move on from the past. They considered a Batman Beyond movie. They considered a Batman vs. Superman movie. But nothing seemed to be quite the direction they wanted to move in. It wasn't that nobody had thought to make a dark, gritty Batman movie. Darren Aronofsky pitched an R-rated, hyper-violent interpretation of Batman Year One where Batman tears into skinheads with all the joy of a child on Christmas. The question that nobody had asked yet was, what would it take for an actual person to put on a bat suit and fight crime? What if you didn't take for granted you were making a Batman movie? What if you had to justify all these characters' choices? I didn't want to treat it as a comic book movie. Everything we did was about being in massive denial that there was such a thing. Instead of treating these characters as disposable pop culture icons, you give them a bit of texture, a bit of gravity. You treat them as mythological characters, because they are. Comic book characters are modern mythology. Batman isn't this quippy, mouth-breathing vessel for product placement. He's more primal than that. At his root, he's the outlaw, the desperado, always 2 steps ahead, always planning, willing to break the rules to do what's necessary, but also in possession of rules he won't break. He isn't Will Smith in Men in Black, he's Odysseus. All the questions about how someone becomes that and what it does to them. If you take those questions seriously, you transcend genre. In that sense, it isn't surprising that Christopher Nolan was able to revive this franchise. Augmenting the tropes of the genre is what he always does. Taking these characters seriously meant an entirely different approach to casting them. Instead of casting the hottest, most in vogue celebrities, Nolan prioritized putting great actors in even the smaller roles, finding people who actually understood the subtler nuances of these characters. So if not the most famous guy, how did you choose someone to play Bruce Wayne?
We knew we needed Batman first. That was always the key, is getting that first, and we did that before we even had a script. And we knew that we wanted the best actor and somebody without too many past associations.
A lot of people screen tested for Batman. If you haven't seen these screen tests, it's fascinating to see some of the directions it could have gone in. Eon Bailey, who I only know from Once Upon a Time, gives an extremely charismatic Bruce Wayne, but his Batman feels like something from the 90s.
Who was with Falcone at the docks? I don't know, I swear to God.
Swear to me!
Cillian Murphy's Batman is pretty strange, but his Bruce Wayne has that same haunted feel we get more of in the Robert Pattinson interpretation. And then you get to Christian Bale, who I've always felt was a somewhat unremarkable Bruce Wayne, but who immediately nails the feel of Batman.
Christian, somehow he'd figured this out before the screen test, that you could not give a normal performance. You could not give an ordinary performance. You had to project massive energy through this costume in order to not question the costume. He had decided that Batman needed to have a different voice to Bruce Wayne, that he needed to put on a voice.
Who was with Falcone at the docks?
I don't know, I swear to God.
Swear to me.
If George Clooney walked up to you in the street, nipples out, and just talked to you in a normal man voice, you'd be like, get your back credit card having ass out of here. If you were walking home and this happened to you,
where were the other drugs going?
I never knew. I don't know. I swear to God.
Swear to me!
After decades of Batman serving mostly as a vessel for whatever superstar to blandly talk underneath a rubber suit, this sort of animalistic growl conveyed like an entirely new feeling for this character, an entirely different part of the person under the costume. But even once you have Batman, you still have to populate this world with all the side characters.
Christopher Nolan has almost that Quentin Tarantino type ability to bring back actors that we haven't seen in a while, whether it's Rutger Hauer in Batman Begins or Eric Roberts in The Dark Knight.
They're wise to your act. You've got rules. The Joker, he's got no rules.
who have these little parts in which they're terrific for 2 or 3 scenes, and you think, boy, where's that person been for the last 10 or 15 years?
Oh, I know exactly what he's been up to. He's been in 794 movies. He has 92 movies currently in post-production. The man hasn't exactly been hiding. Just since The Dark Knight, we've got Snow White: A Deadly Summer, A Talking Cat, The Human Centipede 3, A Karate Christmas Miracle. Genuinely, when this dude is in a movie, you know you're in for a great time. A Husband for Christmas, A Joint Custody Christmas, Eric Roberts. Who do you owe money to? What kind of shit are you into that requires this level of output? Or are you just doing it for the love of the game? Of course, you can't build a moody, atmospheric world without music. The music in the 90s Batman movies, I don't know, it's fine. It's just so trumpety, very dissonant, and with a lot of weird intermittent percussion. The Batman theme just sounds kind of generically triumphant. All the villain themes sound exactly the same. You need somebody who can bring that mystery, who can give you the somber emotional violins and the dramatic action theme. Fortunately, you managed to get the GOAT. Hans Zimmer unveiled a 2-note theme for Batman, and Nolan was like, "Are you sure? Like, shouldn't it sound more like a hero's fanfare?" And Zimmer was like, yeah, pretty sure. These 2 notes provide the core for so much beautiful, evocative music. You get the feeling of speed, of Batman thundering down the street on the Batpod. And the villain themes are incredibly distinctive. The Joker's unsettling razor wire on piano sound has a way of creeping into the background of scenes that he's not in, making him feel present at all times. Bane's dramatic chanting and percussion makes all of his scenes feel like an army is marching behind him. In pulling out the emotional gravity of these characters, the Dark Knight trilogy also completely redefined what a comic book movie could sound like. Batman Begins is the entry in this trilogy that obviously had the most impact on the genre. Every single superhero origin movie that we got in the late 2000s and early 2010s was born of the realization that to treat these characters with a little more gravity was to make them far more interesting. Batman Begins doesn't get 100% of the credit here. Spider-Man 1 and 2 both treated Peter with a bit of that same realistic touch, but the template of a hero introduced, granted powers, and then faced with a figure from their past, set in realistic cities and worlds with renowned actors playing villains and side characters, Batman Begins birthed the modern superhero movie. But Christopher Nolan's opinions when it came to sequels were not shared by the creators of the MCU and the DCEU. Sequels for them were sort of the point. When you can make a lot of fairly enjoyable action movies with the Batman Begins template, you can start linking them together, creating series intrigue by building a shared universe. And that can go on for quite a while, profitable, sustainable, until you get greedy. Until you start linking too much and it all collapses. The Infinity Saga of the MCU has some pretty iconic moments, but they don't live in my soul the way the Dark Knight trilogy does. And Nolan accomplished this by having a very specific vision for his sequels. First, he talks about putting all his eggs in one basket, not leaving anything out of a movie or leaving plot threads hanging on purpose to be picked up later. Make the best, most complete movie you can every time. Assume you're not getting another one. In Batman Begins, Nolan originally gave Rachel's DA boss the name Harvey Dent, but changed it when he and David Goyer decided they weren't doing enough with the character to warrant using that name. Foregoing their chance for Easter eggs and sequel bait allowed them to later create a Harvey Dent for a story where he's at the center of it. Second, Nolan dislikes the idea of sequels that feel like blowing up a balloon. The villains get more powerful and the stakes get raised and it can start to feel empty. Instead, he opted to change genres each time, to create movies that feel entirely different. The standard superhero action movie first, then an electric, fast-paced crime drama, and finally a more sweeping, romantic conclusion. Each genre explores the character in a different way. Each villain requires something different of Batman. Scarecrow forces him to overcome fear. The Joker tests his moral code. Bane threatens to break his spirit. Contrast that with Whip Man and Leonard Shelby and Dark Elves and Bruce Wayne if he ate blue cheese one time. These guys are just interchangeable bags of sand for the heroes to punch. Nolan's villains each illuminate a different facet of the hero and are specifically tuned to the point in Batman's crusade where their clash is most meaningful. If Batman Begins was Christopher Nolan giving the world a cookbook for entertaining superhero action, The Dark Knight is like him burning that cookbook in an attic and using the ashes in a screenwriting alchemy ritual to transform comic book heroes into statues of divinity. When superheroes represent much broader societal and mythological concepts of order and chaos, you're able to tell an incredible story about escalation and power and the corruption of ideals. The part of this movie that fascinates me every single time I watch it is the interplay between Harvey Dent and Batman. Both of them want to be each other. Bruce envies Harvey's ability to inspire, to use the established legal and political systems to actually solve the problems that Batman has been banging his head into. And Harvey wants to escape from, to quote the third movie, the structures that he can feel becoming shackles. The scene in the alley before the press conference gives a fascinating little window into this interplay, with each one envious of and almost disappointed with the actions of the other. The Dark Knight is a time capsule. It's impossible to watch this movie and not see it as a reaction to the public fixation on terrorism in the wake of 9/11, which was not something I was even capable of understanding when I saw this movie for the first time at 8 years old. There is a real fear of chaos and anarchy, but also an apprehension about the lengths that authorities will go to prevent that kind of chaos. Batman's magic use every cell phone in the city as a sonar reader device is a stand-in for all sorts of government surveillance techniques, greenlit as a means to fight terror. Yeah, we might be okay with Batman having that kind of power, but do we trust anyone else as much as we can a fictional conglomeration of idealistic principles? The movie constantly explores the idea of who can be trusted with power. By putting all our trust in one individual, we open ourselves up to the consequences when that individual reveals themselves to be wicked or corrupt. At the same time, it seems to distrust the will of the mob, suggesting that only principled individuals can make the tough, unpopular, morally correct choice. In a very Nolan-esque way, The Dark Knight embraces the paradox that maybe the only people we can trust with absolute power are those who want to see that power destroyed. In the 17 years since seeing it for the first time, my understanding of these themes has slowly trickled in. But what makes The Dark Knight a true masterpiece is how absolutely entertaining it is, even without that critical examination. It says something about the quality of The Dark Knight that I was blown away when I was 8 years old and continue to be blown away every single time I rewatch it. This movie has so much momentum, so much kinetic energy propelling it from one scene to the next. I mean, you start with the bank robbery, into the parking garage, into the mob meeting, into the Hong Kong extraction, into the gala and the parade and the truck chase and the interrogation, and it just does not stop until the credits roll. Every scene demands the next one, and it all has this texture of realism that gives it a very visceral, totally unique feeling as an action movie. I mean, this entire trilogy does. Whenever I see this semi-truck flip over, it's like, damn, that looks good. And it always will, because they actually flipped that fucking truck. They actually blew up this fucking hospital. They actually hung this plane from this other plane. This trilogy is a perfect harmony of a fully human character who relies on physical mechanisms to facilitate his heroism, a grounded and realistic tone that makes the character feel at home in the world, and a director with a dedication to real in-camera magic. It goes without saying that The Dark Knight has probably one of the most iconic performances of all time in Heath Ledger's Joker. I mean, holy shit, the way he just completely disappears into this character, the chaotic and anarchical energy that he brings to every scene. But in the story of Bruce Wayne, the most powerfully emotional acting in the series happens in The Dark Knight Rises. The Dark Knight's conflict was personal in the sense that it was about the ideals that Batman stands for. The Dark Knight Rises is a personal struggle around Bruce Wayne himself. Bane's entire plan revolves around completely breaking Bruce. The story examines Bruce's motives and actions in a much more critical way, suggesting that maybe he wants to put the suit back on for all the wrong reasons. The conflict between Bruce and Alfred is this series at its most emotionally powerful. Alfred wants to see Bruce actually live. He suggests that maybe Bruce can be most useful to Gotham as Bruce Wayne, using his knowledge and resources to guide the city forward. There is even the suggestion that Bruce wants to go back out as Batman because he's trying to get himself killed, that he never had a plan beyond Batman except for Rachel. This argument between them, where Alfred decides to leave Wayne Manor in the hopes of discouraging Bruce from going up against Bane, is the fulfillment of the Batman Begins idea of casting master actors in these roles. Michael Caine infuses the whole thing with a level of desperation and anguish that only an actor of that caliber can. Christian Bale, whose acting skills were not really tested by Bruce Wayne in the first two movies, finally gets to shine as well. Tom Hardy's Bane is a genuinely unsettling villain who is also incredibly hard to understand from a sound design perspective. I saw this movie for the first time at a drive-in. Brother, Bane was already hard enough to understand before he comes at you from a Burger King drive-thru speaker. But he is very unsettling, and in a totally different way than the Joker. The first fight with Bane is viscerally unpleasant to watch. You can tell he's just toying with Bruce. He defeats him effortlessly. It makes Batman feel totally impotent in a way that's almost like depressing, but it lays the groundwork for a legendary redemption. Bruce scaling the wall while the prisoners scream their encouragement, realizing that his lack of fear has become a shackle, making the climb without the rope. Standing for a moment before the jump, surrounded by a swarm of bats. Fucking legendary scene. Has not stopped rattling around in my bones since I was 12 years old. It also helps to have Hans Zimmer blasting straight fire underneath your emotional buildups. Why Do We Fall distills the essence of dramatic redemption. It feels like recovering from a broken spine and climbing out of prison. The whole subplot in The Dark Knight Rises about the nuclear reactor was something I never really got when I was younger. By which I mean before this last time I watched it, like to make this video. After Batman vanishes, Bruce uses Wayne Enterprises' money to fund research into clean power via nuclear fusion, but Dr. Pavel, the scientist from the opening, publishes a paper showing how it can be turned into a bomb. Bruce might as well be at Los Alamos. Here's a stone they can lift, but Bruce can see the snake hiding underneath, so he chooses not to lift it. He abandons his project instead of putting the city in danger. But he can't bring himself to destroy it. He hopes that one day it can be used safely to improve the world, but its mere existence is enough to draw Bane into Gotham. It's cool to go back through Nolan's movies, both The Dark Knight Rises and Tenet, and see the nuclear anxiety there after watching Oppenheimer. The movie landscape we live in now is a post-Dark Knight trilogy world. These movies are probably the main culprit in the absolute explosion of the superhero genre in the 2010s. There are like 10,000 Marvel TV shows that if you walked along their evolutionary tree, all fell out of Batman Begins' loins. Sorry for saying that. Granted, the MCU embraced some fun world-building ideas to help increase their cultural prevalence, but it's crazy to look at the superhero movies that were coming out before Batman Begins and go, wow, yeah, they kind of had no idea what they were doing. And they mysteriously figured it out after 2005. Everybody has to defend the Batman they grew up with. My dad vehemently insists that the 1960s Batman TV show is better than the Christopher Nolan movies, and I'm pretty sure at this point it's just intentionally to piss me off. Okay, but the Batman movie from the 60s is actually funny. And I'm not just saying that because I used to watch it multiple times a week. Batman fights a shark, there's a whole subplot about a guy called Commodore Schmidlap, Robin almost accidentally does eugenics, and Batman has to sternly reprimand him. But to me, this is like barely Batman. If Adam West walked up to you, a criminal, wearing this, I'm doubled over on the floor laughing, dude. Your whole balls are out. Honestly though, maybe still not as funny as a guy coming up to you in a suit with nipples on it. I'm just glad that my childhood was defined by these relatively nippleless movies. It's nice that the Batman whose quality I have to defend is the good one. Superhero movies were so central to my experience of growing up, and if Nolan hadn't reshaped them into something more mythological, this whole part of me would be missing. And that, more than anything, is why I'm so excited for the Odyssey. He already made a masterpiece of Batman. Now he gets to make the proto-Batman with brand new IMAX cameras, with the largest production budget of his career, with a composer fresh off an absolute masterwork, with a cinematographer fresh off an absolute masterwork, with probably the most stacked cast I've ever seen, with 15 more years of filmmaking experience under his belt. Yeah. Our blockbusters seem to increasingly exist in reference to something else, an attempt to resurrect a dwindling franchise or to cash in on some piece of childhood nostalgia. Christopher Nolan stands as a beacon of originality. Every time he steps up to the plate, he does so with the same all eggs in the basket mentality that he approached his Batman movies with. There's a quote he gave in an interview which I think sums him up perfectly. Every time I make a movie, I have to believe I'm making the best movie that's ever been made. His movies aren't hatched intentionally to capitalize on a specific audience or demographic. They aren't leeching onto hot cultural trends. They're personal. He makes them because they just sit there, burning, growing, and changing in the mind. Sometimes for years, sometimes for decades. Movies like that encapsulate all audiences and demographics. They define culture. As time goes on, every facet of our entertainment becomes more and more algorithm-driven. We develop tastes, which a corporate algorithm uses to suggest something else tailored to that taste, and so on until we're all in our own little silos. I think it's largely the reason why the movies aren't as popular as they used to be. How can a studio which has to strategically take chances on entertainment they think will appeal to mass audiences compete with tech companies that can warp the dust storm of content into feeds perfectly molded to individuals like Matthew McConaughey on a bookshelf? Christopher Nolan has created, in a very strange way, his own recursive, self-sustaining algorithm. Give people quality every time. Focus every time on crafting something beautiful, intricate, demanding. Plant something in their minds they've never seen before. And the next time you do it, the snowball picks up more mass, and more, until your R-rated historical drama about nuclear physics and government security clearance hearings jumps to the #1 most popular movie on IMDb off its first trailer, and goes on to make more money than the 3rd Guardians of the Galaxy and the 10th Fast and Furious. There are, of course, other less successful directors and writers equally concerned with quality whose work remains underappreciated. But Nolan isn't just resting on his achievements. He's a crusader for the art form of filmmaking, taking public stands against streaming services and in favor of physical media, defending the quote-unquote antiquated practices of analog filmmaking and in-camera practical effects work. His work shaped my childhood and continues to shape my adulthood. As my love for movies has deepened, my fascination with his filmography has continued to branch and twist, like the mazes he spends years meticulously constructing, finally stumbling out of one, only to see that he spent the last 3 years building another one in front of me. The only way I could ever stop loving this dude's movies is if he made some sort of massive blunder. Wait a second, Michael Caine unretired? And he's not in the Odyssey? He came out of retirement while I was narrating this video to work on a Vin Diesel movie, and you couldn't get him to play Laertes? Or Polyphemus? Or one of the Sirens? Yeah, I've always said Christopher Nolan was one of the worst filmmakers of our time.